Hello. You are listening to the Grieving Parents Sharing Hope podcast. We are here to walk with parents on their unwanted journey of child loss, guiding them to a place of hope, light, and purpose, not in spite of their child's death, but as a way to honor his or her life. And now, here is your host, author, speaker, and bereaved parent, Laura Deal.
Hi, wherever you are listening from, whatever time of day it is for you, thank you for joining me. Today's guest is someone who has gone through a pregnancy loss. Now, for those of us who have not experienced a pregnancy loss, I am certain you will still be blessed by the things Ashley shares, because so much of it pertains to anyone who's lost a child. She brings such a beautiful trust in God, even in the pain of her loss. For those who have experienced the trauma of pregnancy loss, I'm sure there will be a lot of things that you can relate to that is specific for your kind of loss. And once again, she brings such a beautiful trust in God to us from her painful journey. Now, let me start out by introducing her. Ashley Opliger is the USA Today best-selling author of Cradled in Hope and the founder and executive director of Bridget's Cradles, a national nonprofit providing hope and healing to more than 30,000 bereaved families each year in over 1,600 hospitals across all 50 states. She hosts the award-winning Cradled in Hope podcast and is a sought-after speaker and writer. Ashley also leads in-person and online support groups and organizes Wave of Light, an annual remembrance event held on Pregnancy and Infant Loss Remembrance Day. She lives in Wichita, Kansas, with her husband and 2 sons. So here is the talk with my new friend, Ashley Opliger. Well, hi, Ashley. Welcome to the podcast. It's good to finally have you here with me. We've been trying to do this for months, haven't we?
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad it worked out.
Yes. We know it's the Lord's timing. We trust him with that. Now, Ashley, you have experienced a loss that is, unfortunately, it's somewhat common. I hate to say that, but it is. But that doesn't make it any less painful. And that is pregnancy loss. So I would like to start out by having you tell us your story and tell us about little Bridget.
Yeah, I would love to. So my husband, Matt, and I, we live in Wichita, Kansas, and we got married in May of 2014. And we were excited to be married and grow our family. Well, the Lord blessed us very quickly with a honeymoon baby, and we were just so excited. We started picking out nursery colors and buying outfits and just getting very excited. And I was about 13 weeks into my pregnancy. I was at work, and all of a sudden I had very heavy bleeding, and I was rushed to the emergency room. And at that time, they were able to find her heartbeat, and they said, right now, what we're seeing is what's called a subchorionic hemorrhage, and there's really the only thing that you can do is lay down and rest and be on bed rest. And so I ended up taking leave from work and just, taking it very, very easy, praying that she would make it full term and be healthy, because sometimes those kinds of hemorrhages, they will heal themselves. And so we were just praying that the Lord would heal my body and that she would be born healthy and full term. But as the weeks progressed, I kept having more bleeding, and I was going back to the high risk doctor. And every time we would go, they would say the hemorrhage is actually getting larger. And as time progressed, they were saying she's becoming growth restricted because the hemorrhage was actually behind the placenta. And so, as you can imagine, that was really heartbreaking and hard for us to hear. At 19 weeks, we found out that she was a girl, and we had a gender reveal party, and we were just so happy to hear that we were going to have a daughter. But at the same time, in the back of our minds, we just kept thinking, are we going to get to bring her home? Because the doctors had given us such a poor prognosis. And so at 24 weeks, 5 days, I went into labor. Because of the hemorrhage, and it ended up turning into a placental abruption. And my mom came because I was having really a lot of pain, and she brought me to the hospital. And that's when Bridget was stillborn. She came just 30 minutes after we got there. I was fully dilated, and she came, and she did not have a heartbeat. She was not breathing. And so Even though we knew that was a probable outcome, just were not prepared for that. No one can prepare you for delivering a baby that's not crying and not breathing. And it was just trauma and shock and heartbreak all in this moment. And all at the same time, though, the Lord's peace and comfort was in the middle of this room. And my mom, who's an amazing grandma and also a knitter and a postpartum nurse at the time, she had tried to make this tiny little blanket weeks before Bridget was born, preparing for the possibility that Bridget would be premature and very small. And when she made this little blanket, she thought, well, how would I swaddle a baby that's born in the second trimester in this tiny blanket? And that's when God gave her the idea to knit the sides up and turn it into this little cradle. And she had packed the cradle in her hospital bag and just didn't even tell me that she had it, because of course she was still praying that we wouldn't
Right.
need that and I would be full term. But when we had Bridget, they placed her in those traditional hospital blankets, but being that she was 24 weeks and only 13 ounces,
Mm,
very, very tiny, but perfect. She was
mm,
growing hair. She had fingernails. She had eyelashes. She was just so beautiful, but very tiny. We just couldn't really feel her or see her weight, feel her weight or see her really bond with her in these big, bulky blankets she kind of got swaddled up in. And so we placed her inside this beautiful mint green cradle that my mom had
mm.
knit. And that really brought so much comfort. And we got to spend 24 hours in the hospital holding her in this tiny little cradle. And we sang to her and we loved on her and we kissed her and we took photos. And those photos are our most prized possession to this day. And so that's the story of her birth. But as you know, a ministry came from her life, but we can talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Can you tell us the meaning of Bridget's name?
Yes. So Bridget means strength, and her middle name is Faith. And so together means strongest faith, which is a term that I've really clung to in my life through many trials. That our faith is so important, and it's what gets us through the trials, is knowing that there's hope in Jesus and that this world is not our home, and there's an amazing future that awaits all of us as believers in heaven. And so just having faith. And even though she was only 24 weeks and only in our arms that day for 24 hours, she changed our lives forever. And I'm just so honored to be her mom. And I feel blessed that I got to have the time that I did with her.
Oh, that's beautiful. Let's talk about actual pregnancy loss. What were some of those things during those first few days and weeks that made it even harder? Kind of that feeling of getting slapped in the face over and over again that you did not have little Bridget, because I think it's important so that others don't feel like they're the only ones. And those of us who've not had a pregnancy loss may not realize or think about these things. So, what were some of those things that just hit you so hard at the beginning?
Yeah, I think the first major difficulty was leaving the hospital without her. So after the 24 hours, she started, her body was changing because she didn't have life in her. And so they needed to bring her to the funeral home and prepare her for burial. And so we had to give her over to the funeral home, and handing her over was so traumatic
Mm,
and just sad for me. I don't think I've ever cried that hard. It was almost like I was hyperventilating and I couldn't breathe. And just the thought of giving my own daughter and my flesh and blood that had been inside, me for the last 24 weeks, 5 days, and that I had hoped and dreamed that I would get to raise on this earth, to have to hand them over is just, there's really not even words to put to that.
just to hear you say you have to hand your baby over to the funeral home. I mean, what a horrible thing to even have to live through. I do remember someone telling me once with their pregnancy loss that one of the worst parts of it for them was being wheeled out of the maternity ward with another mom with her baby
Yeah.
and having to sit outside, both of them waiting for their husbands to pull up the car. And this woman next to her has her baby. It's like how insensitive of the hospital to do that. But things like that happen,
Mhm.
unfortunately. Any
Yeah, and
other
I don't
things?
even remember the walk out of the hospital exactly. I don't think that happened to me. I mean, certainly there were women delivering babies in the next room
Hmm.
because I was on the labor and
Right.
delivery floor. And so I'm sure I saw other moms and babies while I was there. But I think for me, yeah, handing her over was the just the hardest part of the journey. I think that was even harder than burying her in a
Mm.
way. And then the secondary thing was, yeah, going home in the car without your baby, going back to your house and your womb is empty, the nursery that you were preparing is empty, and all the things that you bought for them, you're not going to get to use. And so I had this moment just laying in the fetal position in this empty nursery, just crying out to God. And really that turned into be my surrender moment for the
Mm.
ministry because I just was in so much pain. And I said, God, if I'm going to choose to believe that she's in heaven with you and I get that truth from your word and from the Bible, then I'm all in for everything that it says. And I was walking with Jesus before Bridget was born, but I think that was the moment that I woke up from my lukewarm Christianity and just said, okay, God, if I'm believing this, and I'm so grateful for salvation and the hope that I do get to see my daughter again. It just really changed the trajectory of my life. But to come back to your question, beyond that, there were other things that I wasn't expecting, like my milk coming in. That
Hmm.
was like a slap on the face. In fact, I had reached out to a friend who had a stillborn before me, and basically likened your milk coming in to being like kicked when you're down, because that's like a physical reminder that your baby's not there. And I got really engorged and I was trying to basically, stop the milk from
Hmm.
coming. And so obviously you can't pump or anything because then it will just
Right. Yes.
more milk. And so I had a lot of physical pain trying to dry up my milk supply and a lot of emotional pain from that as
Oh,
well. Just
yeah.
knowing,
Wow.
like, because I had so looked forward to breastfeeding
Hmm.
Bridget
Sure.
and having that experience as a mom. And so it was a physical and emotional reminder that she wasn't with me. And just everything in our home, you prepare and you buy all the baby stuff, and all of it was not what we weren't going to need it anymore. And so, yeah, just a lot of reminders in our home that we weren't going to be able to raise our daughter. And we would go to her grave frequently, and we still go to her grave frequently. And for some people that might be hard and triggering, but for us that was just a really peaceful place, and still is to this day, to just be there and pray to God and process our grief. So those were some of the hardest moments for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's probably one of those things that once you start thinking about it, more things will come later. Not to, I know you're used to talking about this, but then you never really get used to it. I mean, it's
Mhm.
kind of both ways. Now, you have written the book Cradled in Hope, and there is so much in your book to talk about. It was hard for me to pick out just a few things. But let's start on the topic of lamenting. That is something we as Christians, we just need to become more familiar with it. Now, you describe it as setting time aside to just sit with God in your grief.
Yes. Yeah. Just bringing your pain and sadness to Jesus, turning toward him rather than away from him, and being honest with him about your sorrow.
Yeah, and I that's just so important, and not to feel guilty about being honest with how angry or how hurt or feeling betrayed or whatever. That is all part of it. One thing that I have learned is that lament is something only Christians can do because it is turning to God in our pain.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I have a chapter at the beginning of my book called Sitting in Sadness with Jesus. Sitting with Jesus when you are overwhelmed with sadness. It's chapter 1. And I talk about how grief needs a place to go.
Mm,
And that place is a person, and that's Jesus. And
yes.
bringing our pain and sadness to him, because he's the only one who can heal our hearts and do anything about this. No one can fix this. No one
Hmm.
can bring Bridget back from the dead. No one can reunite me with her. There's only one man that has overcome death, and that's Jesus. And so not only can he give me my ultimate hope, the ultimate desire of my heart, which is to be with my daughter again, he can also walk with me in my pain on this earth and heal my heart and bring joy back to my life and all of these things. And so he is the one that we should direct our grief to. And So actually last weekend, I spoke at my church at a women's event on biblical lament, and I was using the Psalms, specifically Psalm 13, about the pattern that David lays out of how we complain and we have our complaint before God. We petition, so we ask him of something, and then we remember who he is, and we trust that he is who he said he is, and then we praise. And a lot of people think that lament is just the first part, complaining, or, bearing it all. And that's important. That is an important part of grieving, is being honest and letting all of the emotions and all of the doubts and the questions and the anger, all of that come to the surface, because I believe that we cannot find healing if we don't grieve, because
Yes.
a lot of times we just numb the pain, we push it down, we distract ourselves, we do things to try to pacify the pain. But in order for Jesus to heal us, we have to bring that pain to the surface and give him all of the broken parts of our heart. And I liken it in my book to cleaning out a wound with salt. So our method of using the world's ways when we're trying to numb our pain is just basically you've got this huge wound and then you're trying to slap these band-aids on it, of trying to deal with it the world's way or with, various coping mechanisms. But Jesus's way is to go in and clean the wound out. And that's actually kind of painful. And
Yes.
that's a lot of times why we avoid that, is because in order to deal with the pain, we have to feel it. And it's not fun to feel pain. And so just explaining, this is the hard way, is to go through it, not around it or to avoid it, but to go through it with Jesus, but knowing that he's holding our hand and quite literally carrying us through it as our good shepherd through the valley. And it's hard to have that salt in the wound, but that's the ultimate way to actually heal the wound and to move forward. And then for God to use our scars for his glory, our stories, as a testimony of his faithfulness and what he's done in our lives.
Yes, yes, I love that. I want to read something that you wrote in your book, and it says it's a quote that you stumbled on while you were searching for quotes on Pinterest right after Bridget's death. And it says, "Jesus, I wanted to sit my baby on my lap and tell them about you. As I can't do that now, will you sit them on your knee and tell them about me?" I love that. So much of our grief and what we're going through, the lament and everything, so much of it is perspective, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes, I still love that quote so much. I have thought about it even more so now because my dad went to heaven in 2024. So 10 years after Bridget went to heaven, and he was killed by a drunk driver. And that's another part of my testimony and difficult trial that I've walked through recently, and a whole new arena of grief and pain and trauma. But I've thought about that quote in the sense of, like, my dad, I spent 36 years of my earthly life with him. And the last 10 years of his life, he was doing a lot with the ministry of Bridget's Cradles. And we'd always do birthday parties for Bridget on her heaven day. And so I think about the fact that now that he's there, he's telling her about me and about the ministry that we've started and all of these things that we were doing as a family on earth, and sharing stories about our life. And I imagine that Jesus does the same and is keeping them up to date on everything that's going on in earth. And, it's a beautiful picture, thinking about Jesus with our children and just sharing about us. And I don't know how time works in heaven, but I feel like it's going to be a blink of an eye and we'll be there together forever. And so, that quote really comforted me, and it's still a comfort to this day.
Yeah. It's amazing the fact that Bridget didn't take a breath in this earth, did she? But how many lives she's touching is just incredible. I mean, that's just an incredible thing to think about, that someone who never was able to take a breath on this earth has such a huge impact in so many lives. That's something only God can do, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I tell people all the time, besides Jesus, my daughter, Bridget, has changed my life more than any single person on this earth, and she never took a breath. And that's just incredible when you think about it, of someone that was only here for such a short amount of time, how she has changed the rest of my life and how I live out my days, and how I share my faith and share the gospel with people. And it's given me the experience of walking through the death of a child and now the death of a parent. It's given me an urgency to live my remaining days because we don't know how much time we have on this earth. We don't know when Jesus is coming back, and we also don't know when he's going to take us home. And so I think death for me has just raised my level of urgency to have intentionality and purpose in my days, to live for his kingdom, because I just don't know how many days I'm going to have and when I'm going to be there with him. And once we get to heaven, we're not going to need to evangelize anymore. We're not going to need to share the gospel
or give people hope.
We won't need to comfort people because there will be no sin and death there, which is amazing to think about. But right now is our time to be able to use our lives for Christ. And that's what I want to do with the rest of my days. And I don't do it perfectly, but I definitely am sold out for Jesus and want to use all the trials and the pain that I've walked through to comfort other people in their pain.
Yeah, definitely. Let's talk about the should haves that come with pregnancy or infant, young child loss. Things like he should have been starting kindergarten, or she should have been a flower girl instead of, the bridesmaid's niece or something. These are valid pains and they need to be grieved. But we also don't want to find ourselves wallowing in that pain. So what can we do? And I think we started kind of dancing around it, the perspective, isn't it? Talking about the two different views, how we can have two different perspectives.
Yes. So I actually talked about this in my book about how in the early days after we lost Bridget, and really the first several years, I think my husband and I, we would look at what year it was and we would say, well, she would have been 2, she would have been 3, she would have been 5, and think about what she would have been like at that age and what all we were missing at that age. And we talk about it all the time now that we're 11, almost 12 years out, that now we really don't spend our time thinking about what age she would have been or should have been, because we've really rested in God's sovereignty that he had numbered her days. And it's kind of a hard thing to say this out loud, because it sounds like to another grieving mom, they might be like, well, that sounds harsh. But I think it is true. But like, she never was going to be a 10-year-old because God numbered her days and she's in heaven, and that was his plan for her life. And so I think when I live in this alternate reality of she should have been 10, I'm kind of dismissing God's will and sovereignty and not accepting and having peace with his plan. And I know it's so hard because I'm walking through that with the loss of my dad. I would say I'm not at the place of acceptance, that I trust in his plan, that my dad only had 64 years. And, it's something that I will probably reach at some point as I process my grief before God and rest in his sovereignty. But I think at this point in my grief with Bridget, both my husband and I, we really just have full acceptance and peace that she lived out the time that she was supposed to live out. And a lot of that has come from seeing what God has done through her life. And even though we wish that it didn't take for her to die, for this ministry to be born and to help so many people and for me to write this book, it has blessed and comforted so many people. And so when I look back and I think, well, if I could have gone back and changed it, would I trade it all for her to be here? And, my motherly heart would say, yes, I would rather have my daughter. But at the same point, I'm at a place now where I just trust in God's plan and say, who am I to question your plans? And I just have seen so much good come from it in my life and in our family and in the ministry and all the families we've touched. And so I'm at the point where I just would not trade it. I trust that I will see Bridget again. And so she's not a loss. She's a gain to our family. She is going to be part of our kingdom family. And I guess the way that I look at it now is that I just have to wait a temporary amount of time and then I'll be with her forever. And in that temporary amount of time, there's an immense amount of good that's come from it. And so just having that perspective of eternity, knowing that she's always going to be my daughter. I'm going to be with her. And then once I'm with her, I'll never, ever be separated from her again. And I'll
Yes.
have thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And so, in light of eternity, I'm willing to wait. And not that I really got a choice, I didn't have a choice in the
Right.
matter, but I've accepted that, okay, I can wait a little bit longer because every day is one day closer to being
Exactly.
with her again.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. I remember when God showed me that. It was just one of those perspectives that just flipped a lot of things for me. Was you're not getting further and further away from her. You're getting closer and closer to her every single day. And that,
Absolutely.
one of those perspective things that can just make so much difference. I want to go back and dig a little bit deeper on dealing with thoughts like blaming yourself for what happened to your baby or thinking that God did this to you for some reason. To me, it's amazing just because of how many parents I have worked with over the years where they struggle with being angry at God. You had the opposite. Well, I won't say the opposite. You did have very early a moment where you said, God, I can't be angry with you. I need you. And I need you more than I knew I needed you. So we have to realize we almost have to hit it head on, don't we?
Yeah. Well, I can certainly relate to the feelings of blaming yourself. And a lot of women that I've walked through in our support groups have blamed themselves and obviously blamed their body for the
Mhm.
death of their baby. And I had a lot of resentment toward my body because even though I couldn't control what was happening, I felt responsible. Like, this is my body. My body was supposed to be a safe, nurturing
Mhm.
place for her to grow and thrive. And instead, I had this hemorrhage and all these complications. And so I really struggled with kind of hating my body after she was born and just having a lot of resentment toward my body. And I think the enemy then took that and blurred the line between body and identity
Mm.
and started making it more like, well, you're not good enough to be a mom, and those kinds of lies. And I have a whole chapter in my book about spiritual warfare and how the
Yes.
enemy really wants to plant these really awful seeds in the heart of a mom who's lost a baby. And so that was a struggle for me at first of just having this blame, like, well, was there something I could have done differently? And I know so many moms have told me, I wish I wouldn't have eaten this while I was pregnant, or I wish I would have noticed that they stopped kicking sooner. And something that I always tell them, and I have an entire chapter called Grace Upon Grace. It's about when you're blaming yourself, is to have grace for yourself to know that you are a good mom. And if you could have done something, you would have done something.
Exactly.
If you would have known. But this is the hard part about it, is there are things that we don't know and things that are outside of our control or ability to fix. And I think for me, I had to come to that realization that there were things happening inside of my body that I could not change and I wasn't responsible for. I was doing everything humanly possible that I knew to do. I was resting
Right.
and going to my doctor's appointments, but that was all that I could do. And so just saying, you know what, we live in a broken world. We live in broken bodies. And the fall, the brokenness of this world is to blame. The enemy is to blame, not God.
Right. I
And
mean,
I actually
we're in
talk
a
about
war.
that.
Yes. Yes. I
Yeah.
mean, he comes to steal, kill, and destroy. That's his whole purpose. And he's good at what he does, unfortunately.
Yes. And that's something too, is like a lot of times we do blame God for these things, but really the rightful person to blame would be the enemy and Adam and Eve, I guess, and just our general human nature and our
Mm-hmm.
flesh that caused sin to exist in the first place. But praise God that there's a day where all of that is, Satan will be thrown in the lake of fire and the enemy will be defeated and we'll live in a place without sin and death, without crying and mourning and sadness and pain. And that's the place, the new earth that I'm looking forward to. And so I just encourage any of your listeners to go read Revelation 20 through 22, because that is our future home. That's where we'll live forever. And anytime that I just get so discouraged by my current trials and my grief and all of the pain that I've walked through, I have to keep reminding myself, this is not my home. This is not going to be forever. As Christians, there is an expiration date on our suffering. And one day, every tear will be wiped away and everything will be made right. And that's what we have to cling to.
Yes, yes, for sure. Let's talk about the whole rainbow baby thing. Not everyone gets a rainbow baby. I know a lot of moms who don't. You were blessed to have two more boys. I did find something that I thought was very interesting that I think it's important to hear things like this. It was 6 years after you had Bridget that you were pulling out clothes that she never got to wear. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was during my pregnancy with my second son, our third child. We had a boy who's now almost 9.
Mm.
And then when we were expecting our second boy, when I found out that he was a boy, there was just a wave of grief because I had been grieving Bridget and had so hoped to raise a daughter on this earth. And even though I was so happy about having another son because I loved having a boy with our oldest son, and I was so excited to have brothers and for them to just grow up to be buddies, and they have been. And so I've been so blessed by that. But my counselor said it's okay to hold both. It's
Yes.
okay to be so excited about this little boy and to love him so much and be grateful. But it's also okay to grieve the fact that you don't have a daughter here to raise and that you still miss Bridget very much, even 6 years later at that point. And that was really helpful because sometimes we have what we think are conflicting feelings, but really they're feelings that can coexist. We can
Yes.
be grateful and grieving. We can feel sad and joyful. And those don't have to cancel each other out or conflict. They can be coexisting. And so I have a whole chapter about that exact topic of holding both. But yeah, I think there's definitely waves of grief that will come and go throughout your life. And certainly milestones like that can trigger a new wave of
Yes.
grief. And that was the case for me of just realizing I still very much am missing Bridget and had saved all of her girl clothes. And I guess there was a part of me that thought, well, maybe I'll get to use these with another daughter. And I ended up not getting to use them. And my sister has since had a little girl, and I was able to give her a lot of the clothes, and I get to spend a lot of time with my niece. And
So how
that's
how
been
how
very
was
healing.
that? How was that? Because I as you were talking, I was wondering now if you had had another girl, what would it be like to put that girl in the clothes that you had saved for Bridget? Because you might have had grief in a different way. I think it still
Exactly.
would have caused grief. So what is it like seeing your niece in these
Yeah.
clothes? Is it a both thing also?
What you just said about, had we had another girl, you're exactly right, because another girl would never replace Bridget. We would still be
Exactly.
missing Bridget. And I know a lot of grieving moms who lose a boy or a girl, and then they have another boy or girl, whichever gender that
Hmm.
they lost. And they're still, of course, grieving the child that they lost. So just having another child never replaces the child
Exactly.
that went to heaven. But with my niece, I would say because she was just born last year. And so I have been through so much healing in my journey. And she was born after the loss of my dad. And so she was just such this joy, for our entire
Yes.
family after walking through so much pain. And I just have so much love in my heart for her that there's not any sadness when I see her in the clothes. And it's cute because my sister will dress her in things that she knows that I would have dressed Bridget in, or the clothes that I had given her, the colors of Bridget's nursery. And those colors ended up being our ministry colors. And so she'll do that. And it's just so sweet. And I've found a lot of healing in my heart having a relationship with my niece. And in a way, God has been using that special relationship to heal my heart and to have a special bond between her and I.
Yes, I love that. And I think you're right. I think it's because it's not that time heals all wounds. It's what you do with that time. But there is truth to time does seem to ease some of it if you are seeking God, lamenting, doing the things, doing the work of grief. So I think what you were alluding to is if it maybe had been 5 years ago, it might have been painful. But being so far out and just the circumstances, yeah, that it's really more of a joy than it is pain, which is encouraging. Because I think a lot of times parents think, I'll never get past this pain. I'll never, there are always going to be things that trigger me. That it's just always going to be horrible. And that's just not true, is it?
Yeah, it does change over time. I write in my book that time on its own will not heal, but time with Jesus and a
Yes,
solid Christ-centered support system can heal your heart. And that doesn't mean that you don't miss your baby anymore.
exactly.
When I say healing, it doesn't mean moving on or no
Right.
longer missing or aching for them or feeling sadness, because I do still feel sadness. But for me, it's been he has given me that peace and acceptance and brought joy back to my life where I am happy for other people who are having babies. Because I know, like, at first, there's that feeling when you see a pregnant woman or a baby, it just reminds you of your own sadness. And I had asked the Lord very early on after I lost Bridget, I said, I do not want to have a bitterness toward
Mm-hmm.
life. I don't want to be bitter when I see a baby or see a
Yes.
pregnant woman. I want to rejoice in her joy. And, something that just really kind of sink in for me was just saying that's her season, not mine.
Mm.
And that's her joy. And yes, it's reminding me of my sadness, but I'm not unhappy for her. I am happy. I'm just sad
Once
about my
again,
own
it's
life.
that both. It's not an either or, it's a both. You can hold your own sadness and yet be happy for the life that this mom has.
Exactly. Yes.
And also be glad that hopefully she's never experienced the same loss that she's not been through. I mean, we don't know, but yeah. So we've been talking about a lot of the things that are in your book. It's called Cradled in Hope. So how can the listeners connect with you, Ashley?
So you can connect through our ministry, Bridget's Cradles. And so we have a website, bridgetscradles.com. We also have Facebook and Instagram. We're at Bridget's Cradles. And then we have our podcast, Cradled in Hope, and that's anywhere you podcast, but Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's also on our website. We have a transcript and all of anything that you would ever want to know about our podcast is on our website, as well as information about my book, Cradled in Hope. We actually did a book club on our podcast where I went and did an overview of each chapter, and we have 16 episodes that go through my book. We have a journal that's free on my website, which is ashleyOpliger.com. And it's a companion guide to the book so that the questions and the scripture and the items at the end of the chapters, you can actually journal through. There's a print version on Amazon that you can buy, but there's a digital version that's free for download on my website. And I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well as, just Facebook and Instagram at Ashley Opliger.
All right. Okay. We will put some of that in the show notes, especially the website. We'll make sure it gets in there because if they get to the website, they'll probably get to everything else, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And there are so many resources on the bridgetscradles.com website. We have support groups in person and online. We have a lot of ebooks that are all free to download that have a lot of resources for grieving parents. So if you go through there, you'll see so many different things, worship playlists, other people's stories on our blog. So definitely go check that out.
All right. Sounds good. So I have one last question for you, Ashley, as we wrap this up. What does grieving with hope mean to you?
So grieving with hope to me is obviously from First Thessalonians, and it's just that reminder that we are not grieving like the rest of mankind, that even though it is painful, we are going to grieve, we are going to feel pain, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that there is this hope-filled future in heaven waiting for us thousands and thousands of years without end with Jesus on a new earth without pain and suffering and death. And in the meantime, though, I mean, obviously as Christians, we focus a lot on the hope of heaven, and I think that is where we should fix our eyes. But at the same time, Jesus doesn't say, like, it's going to be awful on this earth and you have heaven to look forward to. But he's also Emmanuel saying, I will be with you through the trials. He says, yes, in this world there will be trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And he promises to be with us in those trials. And so grieving with hope to me, I know that there is hope for eternity. My salvation is secure in Jesus, but also he's going to lead me there. He's going to be with me. He's going to heal my heart. And if I surrender it to him, he can use it for a purpose. So anyone who's listening, no matter what it is you've walked through, he can use your pain for a testimony and to help heal others. And I think that's part of our walk as disciples of Jesus, is to share what we've been through and to encourage other believers on their journey as well.
Oh, thank you. That's so good. Well, thank you, Ashley, for being with us today. And we'll get all the information to everybody. Check the show notes, people.
Yes, thank you so much.
I think you will agree that there was a lot of deepness and encouragement in what Ashley had to share with us. I hope those of you who have faced pregnancy or infant loss will connect with her. And maybe some of you may even feel led to find out how you can be part of the ministry of Cradles of Hope and be a grieving parent sharing hope. I have a copy of Ashley's book, and I want to give that away to one of you listeners. It was really hard not to mark it up with underlines and highlights, but I wanted it to be in good shape for the person who gets it. If you want to be put in a drawing for this book, Cradled in Hope, just email me at Laura, Laura, at gpshope.org with the subject line being Bridget. That's all you have to do. Now, there will be a link to my email address in the show notes that you can just click on, put in the subject line Bridget, and I'll know that you want to be entered in the drawing for Ashley's book. Now, the cutoff for the drawing will be Saturday, March 7th at midnight Central Time. So wherever you are, make sure it's on Central Time. Do it before Saturday, then you don't even have to worry about it. On Sunday morning, I'm going to draw a name and I will email the winner to get your mailing address to send it to you. Now, I do, unfortunately, because international mailing is so expensive, I am going to limit this to those of you who are in the U.S. I'm sorry about that, but I feel like I need to do that for shipping purposes. So I'm also asking, please only enter this drawing if you have had a pregnancy or infant loss, because the reason I didn't mark up and highlight this book is because I want to make sure it goes to someone who has experienced this same loss, so they can be really encouraged by Ashley's book. Now, I know I've talked about it a lot lately, but it is one of my favorite books that I have written, which is the Bible's Grieving Parents and the companion journal that I was led to write to go along with it. These books are available now, both in the GPS Hope web store, and I will sign your copies before sending them out. And they're also available directly on Amazon. Now, I do have something to ask. If you have the book already, would you please click on the link in the show notes and give it a rating and a review? Because the more reviews a book has, the more Amazon will put it in front of bereavers doing a search as a suggested resource. So, plus the fact we all read reviews to see if it, when we're looking at something, we read the reviews to see if we want to get it. So if this book was a help to you and you think others should read it, let them know. And if you're wondering, you didn't have to purchase the book on Amazon to give it a review, especially if you use the link that we provide. It takes away their being able to trace it, whether or not you bought the book from Amazon. So just take 90 seconds. Click on the link in the show notes, give it 5 stars, hopefully, and then write 1 or 2 sentences on how it helped you or why you think others should get this book, The Bible's Grieving Parents. And thank you so much. And the parents who are going to read your reviews and decide to get the book and be helped by it, thank you as well. I'm going to thank you in advance for that, for them. If you are a new listener, as part of our weekly podcast, I have the honor of sharing a few children's birthdays, speaking their names, and we remember their lives together during the week of their birthday. So let's go ahead with this week's birthday segment. Maisha Grimes was born on March 1st and is forever 24. Patrick Palazzo was born on March 2nd and is forever 24. Aaron Wright was born on March 3rd and is forever 32. Courtney Harris was born on March 4th and is forever 34. Jonathan Van Vertigem was born on March 6th and is forever 19. We celebrate the day these children came into the world. We know it will always be an important day and worth remembering and celebrating. If having your child's name spoken and their life remembered in this same way, the week of his or her birthday would bring even a small measure of comfort, I would be honored to remember your child with you along with the listeners. Just go to gpshope.org/birthdays. Fill out and submit the form with the needed information. You don't have to wait until their birthday gets close. You can fill it out anytime, and we will make sure that it is shared that week. And Dave will send you an email to remind you to listen. Now, the link for that will also be in the show notes. To wrap up this episode, I want to end by reading something from Ashley's book. She says, "Grief is an invitation to intimacy with Jesus, an opportunity to know Him like you never have before. In your darkest moments, you will discover who He is and learn to rely on Him for your every need. Your desperation and despair will lead you to a deep dependence on your Savior." My love for Jesus has grown the most during the hardest seasons of my life. When I had nothing left, He became my everything. When I was weak, He was my strength. 2 Corinthians 12:9. I learned to trust Him in the valleys, not the mountaintops, for it is in these valleys your faith will be like gold that has been tested in a fire. 1 Peter 1:7. And I have to say, I agree with Ashley. Many of you have heard me say this or read things that I've written along that line. It is in these dark places that we can grow the closest to Jesus if we open our hearts and allow that to happen. I want to give one last reminder. If you have had a pregnancy loss or infant loss, send me an email to be entered in a drawing for Ashley's book. Use the link in the show notes for that and write the name Bridget in the subject line. No matter how young or how old your child was that passed from this earth into the arms of Jesus, I want to remind you to hold on. Pain eases. There is hope.